My family drilled my locks and moved in while I was away, so I sold the house for $1. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I stared at the fresh metal shavings beneath my deadbolt, listening to my brother laugh inside my living room. That was the exact moment my reality snapped. I had just driven 14 hours straight, my eyes gritty, my body running on cheap gas station coffee and the desperate promise of my own bed. 2 months. I'd been gone for a mandatory 2-month IT deployment across the state. All I wanted was a hot shower and silence. Instead, my key jammed halfway into a lock that looked chewed up and spat out. The brass plate was scratched. Metal dust coated the welcome mat I'd bought myself as a housewarming gift. I jiggled the handle again. Locked. But it wasn't my lock anymore. Inside, muffled but unmistakable, the television was blaring a sports game. Then, a voice. Kevin's voice. "Ma, grab me another beer while you're in there." My 32-year-old brother, who hadn't held a steady job since the Obama administration, was shouting orders in the house I bled to pay for. I stood on the porch, freezing, processing the violation. They hadn't just stopped by, they had drilled the locks. My stomach dropped into a freezing abyss. This was my sanctuary, a 3-bedroom suburban haven I'd bought specifically to escape the relentless, chaotic gravity of my family. I worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and hoarded every penny to put my name on that deed. It was my fortress against their extreme entitlement. My mother, Barbara, had always treated my money like a family slush fund, and Kevin was her eternal charity case. But breaking and entering? Even for them, this was a terrifying, criminal escalation. I pressed my ear to the door, my pulse hammering violently against my eardrums. "It's so much nicer than the apartment, right, Kev?" My mother's voice floated through the heavy wood, sickeningly cheerful. "Alex won't mind. Family shares everything, anyway." My vision swam with red-hot rage. I backed away, pulling out my phone. I wasn't going to knock politely and ask for permission to enter my own home. My finger hovered over the keypad, wondering if I should call the cops or kick the door down myself. I took a deep breath, raised my fist, and hammered furiously on my own front door. To understand the sheer audacity of what was happening behind that door, you have to understand the nightmare I had finally escaped. For as long as I can remember, I was the designated survivor in my family, which really just meant I was the ATM. I'm Alex, 28 years old, and my entire adult life has been defined by drawing lines in the sand that my mother and brother immediately trampled over. When I got my first real paycheck at 19, my mother, Barbara, cried tears of joy, not because she was proud, but because Kevin needed his car fixed and now we had the money. Kevin was the classic golden child. If he failed, the world was unfair. If I succeeded, it was because I was lucky and owed them my spoils. Would you let your mother steal your home? That's the question I had to ask myself as I stood on that porch. I had spent 4 years eating ramen, working 60-hour weeks at an IT firm, and ignoring every guilt trip my mother threw at me when I stopped paying Kevin's rent. I saved a 20% down payment through pure, spiteful determination. The day I got the keys to this quiet, suburban house, I sat in the middle of the empty living room and wept. It was mine. The silence was mine. The walls were mine. I painted the living room a calm, slate gray. I bought nice furniture. I created a bubble where the chaos of my bloodline couldn't reach me. Or so I thought. Whenever Barbara asked for a spare key for emergencies, I gave a hard, non-negotiable no. I knew exactly what an emergency looked like in her eyes. Kevin getting evicted again, or her fighting with her landlord. I established brutal, exhausting boundaries. I thought I had trained them to respect my distance. I thought the thick oak door and the heavy deadbolt were enough to keep the vultures out. But I had underestimated the sheer, delusionary entitlement of a mother protecting her favorite son. They didn't see my house as an achievement. They saw it as an unexploited resource. The heavy front door suddenly swung open, revealing my brother holding a half-empty bottle of beer. Let's rewind 2 months to the day I left for my deployment. My company had landed a massive infrastructure upgrade project across the state, and as the lead network engineer, I was required to be on-site for 8 weeks. It was a career-making opportunity, but it meant leaving my fortress unattended. Before I packed my bags, I made a crucial mistake. I went to dinner with my mother. Over cheap pasta, I told her I'd be gone. Immediately, her eyes lit up with that familiar, predatory gleam. Oh, Alex, Kevin's lease is up next week and he's between places. It would be perfect. He can house sit and keep an eye on things. I shut it down instantly. No, Mom. Absolutely not. Nobody goes in the house. I have a security system, the mail is paused, and the neighbors have my number. The house stays empty. She pouted, playing the victim, sighing about how hard the world was on poor Kevin. I looked her dead in the eye and reiterated, if anyone tries to go in, the alarm will trigger, and the police will show up. Do not test me. She agreed, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. I left feeling a sense of dread, but I rationalized it. I hadn't given them a key. The alarm was active. What could they realistically do without risking a felony charge? I spent those 8 weeks living out of a sterile corporate hotel, working grueling 12-hour days. Every night, I would look at the photos of my house on my phone, visualizing my comfortable couch and my expensive espresso machine. It was the carrot dangling at the end of a very long stick. My mom texted me occasionally, mundane updates, avoiding the topic of Kevin's living situation. I assumed he had found another friend's couch to ruin. I assumed my strict boundaries had finally, mercifully worked. My home security app showed no breached doors, no tripped alarms. It was peaceful. It was entirely a lie, built on a fatal flaw I hadn't considered. I never imagined they would bypass the security system by simply cutting the power lines outside. Alex, hey bro, didn't expect you back until Friday, Kevin said, leaning against my doorframe like he was welcoming me to a frat party. He took a swig of his beer, completely unfazed by the fact that I was hyperventilating on my own porch. I pushed past him, my duffel bag dropping to the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The smell hit me first, stale cigarette smoke and cheap takeout. My beautiful, slate-gray living room was a disaster zone. Piles of dirty laundry were draped over my custom sofa. Empty pizza boxes were stacked high on the glass coffee table I polished every single week. What the hell is this? What are you doing in my house? I screamed, my voice cracking with pure, unadulterated fury. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on one of my expensive linen dish towels. Alex, honey, calm down. Your blood pressure, she cooed, using that sickeningly sweet tone she reserved for extreme manipulation. Kevin got evicted. He had nowhere to go. You were out of town, and it made no sense for this big, beautiful house to sit empty while your own brother slept on the street. I pointed a trembling finger at the ruined deadbolt. You drilled my locks. You broke into my house. Kevin rolled his eyes, dropping onto the sofa and putting his dirty sneakers up on the table. Relax, man. I paid a locksmith. Told him I lost my key. Mom vouched for me. I stormed down the hallway toward the master bedroom. My heart shattered. My bed, my expensive, memory-foam sanctuary, was unmade, reeking of Kevin's cologne. His clothes were shoved into my closet, pushing my neatly hung suits aside. They hadn't just crashed here, they had colonized my home. I felt physically sick, violated in a way I couldn't articulate. Get out, I whispered, turning back to them, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Both of you, pack your garbage and get out right now, before things get ugly. Mom just sighed, shaking her head. We live here now, Alex. My vision went entirely black with rage as I pulled my phone to dial the police. The dispatch operator heard the panic in my voice, and within 10 minutes, a cruiser pulled into my driveway. Officer Davis, a weary-looking man in his 40s, stepped up to the porch. I met him outside, rambling fast. They broke in. They drilled my locks. I've been out of town for 2 months, and my family just invaded my house. I want them removed for trespassing. Officer Davis nodded calmly and stepped inside. My mother immediately turned on the waterworks, playing the helpless, confused matriarch to absolute perfection. Officer, I don't understand, she sobbed softly. We've been living here for weeks. My son is just having a mental breakdown. He told us we could stay. I yelled that she was lying, but Kevin casually walked over to the kitchen counter and handed the officer a stack of envelopes. Here's my proof of residency, sir, Kevin said smoothly. I stared in absolute horror. They were utility bills and bank statements, all bearing Kevin's name, mailed directly to my address. He had forwarded his mail here the day after I left town. He even had a fake, handwritten lease agreement that my mother had forged my signature on. Officer Davis reviewed the papers, his expression hardening. He pulled me aside into the hallway. Listen, son, I believe you. The lock is clearly drilled, and you look like you just got off a long drive. But they have mail here. They've been here over 30 days. In this state, that establishes tenancy. My jaw dropped. Tenancy. They broke in. They are intruders. Davis sighed, handing me back my ID. Because she's your mother, and he's your brother, and they have mail, I cannot legally drag them out. This is no longer a criminal trespass issue. It's a civil matter. The heavy weight of the law was suddenly suffocating me. I had done everything right, bought my home legally, yet the system was protecting the parasites. You have to take them to civil court, Officer Davis explained grimly. If I force them out tonight without a judge's order, they can sue the department and sue you for illegal eviction. I watched the police cruiser pull away, leaving me entirely defenseless against my own family. The moment the patrol car turned the corner, the atmosphere in the house shifted violently. The fake tears vanished from my mother's face, replaced by a smug, victorious smirk. Well, she said, crossing her arms defensively. I guess that settles it. We aren't going anywhere. Kevin laughed, dropping back onto my sofa and kicking his feet up. Don't be dramatic, Alex. You can take the guest room. Or the couch. We're family. We make it work. The sheer, blinding audacity of offering me the couch in the house I owned, the house I paid the mortgage on, made me want to tear the drywall down with my bare hands. I am not sleeping in this house with you parasites. I spat, grabbing the duffel bag I hadn't even unpacked. Enjoy it while you can. I'm getting a lawyer. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the quiet suburban street. I drove to a cheap, run-down motel by the interstate. Sitting on a stained mattress that smelled of bleach and despair, I broke down. I sobbed for the sanctuary I had lost, for the betrayal of my own blood, and for the absolute absurdity of my situation. I was paying a $2,000 mortgage, property taxes, and home insurance, yet I was paying $60 a night to sleep in a roach motel. BZZT, BZZT. My phone vibrated on the cheap laminate nightstand. A text from my mother. Please don't ruin the family over a house, Alex. Kevin is finally happy. Be a good brother for once. I threw the phone against the opposite wall. It didn't break, which was a shame, because I wanted something to shatter the way my life just had. The psychological warfare had begun. They knew I was a rule follower. They knew I was responsible. They were banking on the fact that I would eventually tire myself out, accept the new normal, and just quietly subsidize their miserable lives. They thought I was weak, but they had no idea what a cornered animal could do. First thing Monday morning, I was sitting in the polished oak office of a local real estate attorney. I laid out the facts, the drilled locks, the forged lease, the fake mail, the police calling it a civil matter. The lawyer, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, rubbed his temples. I see this all the time, Alex. Especially with family. Squatters' rights and tenant protection laws in this county are incredibly strong to prevent abusive landlords from throwing people onto the street. Unfortunately, those same laws are easily weaponized by professional leeches. I leaned forward, desperate. So what's the process? How quickly can we get the sheriff to drag them out? The lawyer sighed, pulling out a yellow legal pad. First, we issue a 30-day notice to quit. Since they'll ignore that, we file an unlawful detainer lawsuit. Then we wait for a court date, which, with the current backlog, is about 3 to 4 months out. If they contest it and claim an oral agreement or partial ownership through your mother, it goes to trial. Best case scenario, 6 months. Worst case, 9 months to a year. My blood ran cold. And the cost? I whispered. Retainer is $3,000. He replied flatly. If we go to trial, expect to pay upwards of $8,000 to $10,000. Plus, you're still legally obligated to maintain the property. You can't shut off the water or the power, or they will sue you for an illegal self-help eviction. I walked out of that office in a complete daze. A year. A whole year of paying a mortgage for a house I couldn't enter, paying for their electricity, their water, their heat, while bleeding thousands in legal fees. I sat in my car in the law firm's parking lot, staring blankly. The feeling of total defeat washed over me like concrete pouring into my lungs. If I fought them legally, I would go bankrupt paying for 2 residences and a lawyer. They had checkmated me. I drove past my neighborhood that evening, desperately hoping to find a reason to keep fighting. I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked silently toward my street. hiding in the evening shadows like a criminal stalking my own property. What I saw broke whatever restraint I had left. My meticulously manicured front lawn, the one I spent weekends edging and fertilizing, was covered in deep, muddy tire tracks. Kevin had parked his rusted, leaking Honda Civic directly on the grass. An old mattress was leaning against the side of the garage, alongside bags of trash that hadn't been put in the bins. They were turning my suburban dream into a derelict nightmare. Through the large front window, the blinds were wide open. I could see my mother sitting in my expensive, leather reading chair, carelessly resting a glass of red wine directly on the bare armrest. Kevin was pacing the living room, smoking a cigarette inside. I had a strict, zero-tolerance policy for smoking. The smoke would seep into the drywall, the carpets, the HVAC system. Even if I spent $10,000 and a year of my life to evict them, the sanctuary was gone. The house was forever tainted by their disrespect. I would never be able to sit in that living room without remembering the sheer violation of this moment. I realized then, with a cold, terrifying clarity, that I didn't want the house anymore. I just wanted them to hurt. I wanted them to feel the exact same helplessness and terror that I was feeling right now. If the legal system required me to act like a landlord to evict a tenant, then I was playing the wrong game. I started my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They wanted a free ride. They wanted a landlord who wouldn't fight back because of blood ties. They felt safe because they knew I was a decent person who played by society's rules and cared about preserving my assets. But what if the landlord wasn't their son, and what if he didn't care about rules? I spent the entire night in a greasy 24-hour diner, fueled by black coffee and manic energy, scouring deep-cut real estate forums on Reddit. I searched for how to remove family squatters without eviction, scrolling past pages of unhelpful legal advice. Then, buried in a thread from 3 years ago, I found a comment that stopped my heart. You can't legally kick out family without an eviction because of the emotional/verbal lease complications. But a new owner has no prior relationship with them. Sell the property as is, with tenants inside, to a cash buyer. Let them be the bad guy. It was a brilliant legal loophole. I couldn't evict them quickly, but a hostile new owner could trigger entirely different property laws. I began researching local we-buy-ugly-houses cash flippers. I didn't need a corporate buyer. I needed a shark. I needed someone aggressive, someone who made their living doing the dirty work. That's when I found the online footprint of Marcus. Marcus was a local property developer infamous in city council meetings. He specialized in buying distressed properties, clearing out drug dens, and flipping them. Reviews called him a monster, a legal bully, and a ruthless operator. He sounded absolutely perfect. I drafted an email to Marcus at 3 a.m. I laid it all out. A $300,000 suburban house in a highly desirable neighborhood. Great bones, new roof, perfect condition, save for a few cosmetic damages inside. The catch? It was currently occupied by hostile, non-paying family members claiming residency. I told him I didn't want market value. I didn't want 50% of market value. I was willing to surrender my entire equity and transfer the deed for an insultingly low amount. This wasn't a standard real estate transaction. It was a tactical strike. I needed Marcus to apply the overwhelming, crushing legal and physical pressure that I was ethically and legally barred from using against my own mother. I hit send on the email, terrified that he would think it was a massive scam. Marcus called me at 7 a.m. sharp. I read your email. A gravelly, no-nonsense voice barked through the phone. I'm looking at the property records right now. You own it free and clear, or is there a mortgage? I explained there was a mortgage, but I had enough in my emergency savings to pay off the remaining balance if it meant getting rid of the house. Meet me at the diner on 5th Street in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. Marcus was a broad-shouldered guy in his late 40s, wearing a Carhartt jacket and a permanent scowl. He slid into the booth opposite me, ignoring the waitress. Explain the catch, he demanded. Nobody gives away a $300,000 asset. Are there liens? Is it structurally compromised? I looked him dead in the eye. No liens. It's pristine. The catch is my mother and brother drilled the locks and are squatting. The police won't remove them. I refuse to spend a year and $10,000 evicting my own blood. I want out. Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. So what's the pitch, kid? I took a deep breath. I will sell you the deed to the property for exactly $1. In exchange, I pay off the remaining mortgage today, completely severing my financial ties. You take immediate, full ownership of a free and clear property, but you have to evict them. You use your lawyers, your crew, your methods. I want them out, and I want them to know they have zero power. You understand, Marcus rumbled softly, leaning over the table, that when I take possession, I don't play nice. I will serve a cash for keys ultimatum, and if they refuse, my lawyers file an emergency injunction for property destruction while my contractors begin necessary renovations at 6 in the morning. I felt a dark, thrilling validation. That is exactly what I am paying you $1 to do. We shook hands over the diner table, sealing the fate of my mother and my brother. The next 48 hours were a blur of intense, high-stakes financial maneuvering. I liquidated my entire emergency fund, sold my stock portfolio, and wired the funds to the bank to entirely satisfy the remaining balance of the mortgage. It hurt to watch my life savings drain to zero, but the alternative, being bled dry slowly over years by my family, was a fate far worse than bankruptcy. Once the bank issued the payoff letter, I met Marcus and his real estate attorney at a local notary office to finalize the historic transfer. The attorney slid the quitclaim deed across the polished mahogany desk. Just to be clear, Alex, the attorney said, adjusting his glasses, you are transferring total ownership of a property valued at $315,000 to Marcus's LLC for the sum of $1. You cannot undo this once the stamp hits the paper. I looked at the document. It represented 4 years of my sweat, my missed weekends, my late nights. It was my pride. Giving it away felt like cutting off my own arm to escape a steel bear trap. But then I pictured Kevin smoking in my living room. I pictured my mother's smug face when the police officer told me I couldn't kick them out. The house wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a prison they had built for me. I picked up the heavy black pen and signed my name on the dotted line. The notary stamped it. Thump. It was done. Marcus slid a crisp $1 bill across the desk. I picked it up, folding it into my wallet. The relief that washed over me was instantaneous and intoxicating. The deed gets filed electronically with the county clerk in 10 minutes, Marcus said, checking his watch. As of this afternoon, your family is illegally occupying property owned by Apex Development Solutions. And Apex doesn't have a bleeding heart. Now, there was only one thing left for me to do before Marcus dropped the hammer. I called the non-emergency police line and requested a civil standby, explaining that I needed to retrieve essential work items from a hostile domestic environment. Officer Davis, the same cop from before, met me at the house. As we walked up the driveway, I noticed another fresh oil stain from Kevin's rusted car. I didn't care anymore. It wasn't my driveway. I unlocked the door with my new key, the one Kevin had so graciously given me after drilling my original locks, and walked in with the officer right behind me. My mother jumped up from the couch, her face twisting into a scowl until she saw the uniform. Then, the fake, gentle matriarch persona returned. Alex, honey, you brought the police again? We told you. You are welcome to sleep on the sofa. I ignored her completely. I walked straight into the master bedroom, grabbed my laptop, my external hard drives, my important legal documents, and 3 suits for work. I shoved them into a rolling suitcase. Kevin leaned against the doorframe, munching on my expensive potato chips. Giving up already, bro? Kevin sneered around a mouthful of food. Good call. You know you can't kick us out. Mom says you're just throwing a tantrum and you'll come around to paying the bills soon enough. I zipped my suitcase, locking eyes with my brother. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel rage toward him. I just felt a cold, deep pity. You're right, Kevin, I said evenly. I can't kick you out. The house is all yours. Do whatever you want with it. My mother beamed, literally clasping her hands together in victory. She thought she had broken my spirit. As I rolled my suitcase past her, she reached out to pat my shoulder. We're family, Alex. We share our blessings. I didn't flinch. I loaded my life into the trunk, knowing they were standing on a trapdoor. I drove back to my cheap motel, poured a glass of whiskey, and waited for morning. At exactly 7 a.m. the next morning, Marcus struck with the force of a localized hurricane. He didn't send a polite letter in the mail. He arrived with a locksmith, 2 massive contractors carrying heavy toolboxes, and a ruthless property lawyer. According to the play-by-play Marcus gave me later, he pounded on the door until a hungover Kevin opened it. Before Kevin could even speak, Marcus stepped into the doorway, blocking it open, and aggressively handed him a thick legal folder. "Who the hell are you?" Kevin demanded, trying to push Marcus back. Marcus didn't budge. "I am the legal owner of this property," Marcus barked, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "Apex Development Solutions. You are trespassing on a commercial construction site. You have exactly 10 minutes to accept the $2,000 cash for keys buyout and vacate the premises immediately, or my lawyer will file an emergency injunction for malicious property destruction." My mother rushed into the living room, pulling her robe tight. "You're lying. My son owns this house. He told us we could stay," she shrieked. The lawyer calmly held up the freshly stamped quitclaim deed. "Alex does not own this house, ma'am. He sold it to my client yesterday. There is no familial relationship protecting you anymore. You are unauthorized squatters holding up a commercial renovation. If you do not take this cash and leave right now, we will rip the front door off its hinges for immediate structural repair, shut off the main water line, and call the police to arrest you for criminal trespassing." They tried to argue, tried to pull out the fake lease, but Marcus laughed in their faces. He gestured to his contractors, who immediately fired up a loud, gasoline-powered air compressor in the driveway. The message was brutally clear. Marcus was immune to their emotional warfare. Panic finally set in as my mother realized I had detonated a nuclear bomb on them. My phone started vibrating on the motel nightstand at 7:15 a.m., and it didn't stop for 3 solid hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, sipping stale coffee, listening to the voicemails roll in. The transition from supreme arrogance to absolute, hysterical terror was music to my ears. The first voicemail was from Kevin, his voice shaking with panic. "Alex, bro, answer the phone. Some psychotic construction guy is here claiming he owns the house. He's got guys with sledgehammers on the lawn. Tell them to back off." 20 minutes later, a voicemail from my mother. She was hyperventilating. "Alex, what did you do? How could you sell the house? They are threatening to call the police and have Kevin arrested for fraud. They said they're going to take off the roof. You have to fix this. You can't leave your family homeless." I listened to her sob, feeling an incredible, profound emptiness. For 28 years, that crying would have triggered a Pavlovian response in me to fix her problems, to sacrifice my own well-being. Now, I just felt nothing. They pushed me to the absolute edge, and I chose to jump off rather than carry them anymore. By 9 a.m., the tone shifted to vicious, hateful vitriol. Kevin left a message screaming that I was a psychopath, that I had robbed them of their home, that he was going to sue me. But I had nothing left to sue for. At 10:30 a.m., Marcus texted me a single, glorious photograph. It showed my mother and Kevin standing on the curb next to their leaking Honda Civic, holding trash bags full of their clothes. Behind them, Marcus's crew was boarding up the front windows. They had taken the $2,000 buyout. Faced with a real adversary, my bullies had instantly folded. My house was officially gone forever, but looking at that photo, I had never felt richer. It has been 6 months since I sold my dream home for a single, crumpled $1 bill. To most people, walking away from hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity sounds like absolute madness. And financially, it was. I had to rent a small, one-bedroom apartment across town. I am back to living on a strict budget, rebuilding my savings from absolute scratch. But every time I unlock the door to my tiny apartment, with a key that belongs only to me, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I made the right decision. My mother and Kevin blew through Marcus's $2,000 in less than a month. I know this because my aunt called me, furious, demanding to know why I had evicted my poor mother into a cheap motel. I explained exactly what happened, blocked my aunt's number, and finally changed my own. I have gone completely, permanently no contact with my entire immediate family. The house was the final test, and they failed it so spectacularly that it severed whatever remaining threads of obligation I felt toward them. They proved that they would happily destroy my life to make theirs slightly more comfortable. What I learned is that sometimes the price of peace is astronomical. Sometimes, cutting off toxic family requires you to burn your own crops just to starve them out. But you can always buy another house. You can always make more money. What you cannot buy back is your sanity, your self-respect, and your right to a safe sanctuary. I gave Marcus a house, but I bought my absolute freedom. To anyone out there dealing with manipulative family members who use blood as an excuse for abuse, do not let them win. Set your boundaries in stone, and if they bring a sledgehammer, detonate the building. I keep that crisp $1 bill framed on my wall to remind me what peace costs.